How bad is it?
Bad. We just lost contact with 2 of our deep space outposts. There's something massive on long-range scanners.
Is this what Shepard warned us about?
I'd stake my life on it.
How long do we have?
Not long. I sent word. The fleet's immobilizing.
God help us all.
How does one conclude arguably the biggest trilogy in gaming history at the time? How does every major plot thread and narrative beat come together to tie a bow on a story that has been written for nearly a decade? How can this be done with an ever-changing industry, with ever-changing staff, and the shroud of capitalism and corporate demands looming over every part of development? How can a trilogy be concluded when the ending was never set in stone in the first place? And more damning, how can all of this be done in half the time it took to make what came before? These questions are at the heart of Mass Effect 3, and are indicative of the notable struggle Bioware had to make this finale. With a notable focus on delivering the entire trilogy in one console generation instead of having them split between old and new, Mass Effect 3 was initially slated for late 2011, to be produced in under 2 years. This would already be a monumental task, but it was made even harder by the inclusion of a multiplayer game mode. Originally, alongside Mass Effect 3, the newly formed Bioware Montreal would develop and release Mass Effect Team Assault, a standalone multiplayer game that is described in Geoff Keighley's The Final Hours of Mass Effect 3, quote, would mix the playstyles of Unreal Tournament and Battlefield 1943, end quote. With its internal positive reception, Casey Hudson, project director of the franchise, garnered the idea of multiplayer not only being included with Mass Effect 3, but also integral to the game's narrative and progression. Putting Team Assault on the back burner, only for it to never be released, Mass Effect 3's multiplayer was focused on representing the stakes of the game outside of Shepard's perspective, while also allowing players to finally play as other races outside of humans, such as Asari, Tyrians, Krogans, etc. To make matters even harder on the team, Electronic Arts and stakeholders also wanted the game to appeal to newcomers who hadn't played the games before, putting a mountain of pressure on the team beyond trying to come up with narrative conclusions and gameplay evolution from the previous entry. With all of this to account for, something had to give, and after calls and discussions, the game was officially delayed to March 6, 2012. Despite this, Hudson and designer Preston Watamunik both knew it wasn't enough time to fully realize their vision, and as such, multiple ideas, missions, and content were cut from the game, the most notable being a Prothean Squadmate with massive impact upon the story, later turned into DLC released the same day Mass Effect 3 came out. This cut massively changed the story structure, even rearranging story beats to compensate for the lack of the Squadmate's appearance. On top of this, the team still struggled to hammer down an exact ending, such as the role of the Elusive Man and possible final boss ideas. All of this was hard enough, but all of it was made worse by the massive leak of Mass Effect 3's beta. A mistake in deploying the beta to employees, only for it to be posted on Xbox Live for the world to see, the beta's leak not only revealed gameplay, but also revealed, through reverse engineering, much of the script that was planned for Mass Effect 3, including aspects of its ending and forcing Bioware to change aspects of it. The reaction from fans was a blow to the team, with Hudson noting in the final hours of Mass Effect 3, quote, the reaction from everyone online was, these writers are idiots. This is the worst thing that I have ever read. It would be like saying the script for Star Wars is, Farm Boy meets up with 2 robots who have a message, and the 3 of them go off and meet the wizard on the mountain. End quote. Despite all of these issues and many more, such as the crunch the developers were doing to get the game out, upwards of 15-hour workdays, Mass Effect 3 would manage to release to both critical acclaim and massive sales at launch. However, all of that initial acclaim would go out the window for many players with the original ending, an ending so controversial that even to this day, it is affecting Bioware as a company. All of these development issues are noted for the similar reason they were in the first retrospective I wrote for the trilogy, in that many of the issues that Bioware would face in later years in terms of development, ambition, scope, an angry consumer base, and ever-changing talent were issues that they were facing even in the arguable zenith as a development company. Bioware magic, the notion that through massive crunch in a short period, their projects would eventually come to fruition even without a plan, was in full effect for Mass Effect 3 the moment they decided it needed to come out no later than 2012, despite the nature of the game as a conclusion for a trilogy with massive choices. While a lot of the decisions regarding the game can be of course directly attributed to EA, especially its monetization schemes with the multiplayer and downloadable content, as noted with the development of the first Mass Effect and Mass Effect 3, many of these choices regarding development in the crunch are a direct result of Bioware's own executive decisions. While games such as Dragon Age Inquisition, Mass Effect Andromeda, and Anthem would have more massive problems due to their development, Mass Effect 3 can arguably be seen as what should have been the straw that broke the camel's back. Yet, with its massive acclaim and sales despite the controversy around its ending, that Bioware magic remained. It was EA's monetization scheme growing in terms of influence upon their games. If Mass Effect 2 was the start of a new AAA Bioware, Mass Effect 3 was the full-on realization of it in the negative aspects that would boil over in the future. Considering all of this, it's honestly a testament to the talent of the developers under this massive amount of pressure and lack of time that Mass Effect 3 ends up as good as it is, flaws and all. If Mass Effect was a sprawling space opera, and Mass Effect 2 was a party-focused adventure based on loyalty and preparation for an impossible task, Mass Effect 3 doesn't hold back at all regarding what type of game it is, a war game. This was intended to be the progression and eventuality of the trilogy, as noted by lead writer Mac Walters during an interview with Eurogamer around the release of the trilogy's remaster, with Walters, quote, printing off a Winston Churchill quote, laminating it, then sticking it up on the door of the Bioware's writing pit, where he and around 8 other writers were beginning to break down the game's story. End quote. That tone is immediately set with the introduction of the game having Shepard on Earth, the first time the planet has been seen in the series, questioned for their previous actions, either working for Cerberus or, if the player completed a rival, the death of 300,000 Batarians to delay the Reapers, only for the Reapers to invade and begin destroying the planet. The game doesn't hold back, showing a child Shepard meets while trying to escape being killed when an escape ship is shot down by a Reaper, as Shepard leaves Admiral Anderson to defend Earth while they try to unite the galaxy against the Reapers. What sets that feeling on top of the presentation and narrative is the gameplay. A goal the team had in terms of improving the gameplay for Mass Effect 3 was to have it be the best among its third-person contemporaries and competitors. To that effect, role-playing aspects that were diluted in the prior entry are instead properly combined with the action gameplay. Shepard can now level to level 60 like the first game, guard his new powers, and even has certain powers returned from the first Mass Effect depending on the class they play, such as Sabotage, Carnage, and Stasis, though modified to fit the combat system of this game. Each power now has 2 different pathways for Shepard to take in the middle, rather than the final choice being at the end of the skill trees, with the different options providing a greater array of build crafting for the player. A prime example of this is the new power Nova for Vanguards, an ability that uses all of their barriers to cause a huge shockwave around them. Within its skill tree, the player can not only debate between more force and damage or radius, but also has the choice of making the skill a half blast, only taking half of their barrier but decreasing the damage by 40%. Grenades also make a return with unique properties and powers based on the class, collected alongside regular thermal clips deposited throughout levels. Squadmates, while naturally lacking the same amount of skill Sept has like previous entries, also gain these leveling options as well, allowing much more thought and build creativity to them equally. Weapons also gain a significant overhaul as well. On top of Mass Effect 3 boasting 62 weapons between the different weapon classes, weapons now can be directly upgraded using credits up to level 5 in the base game and 10 in New Game Plus. They can either be found throughout various missions or bought from different vendors, combining the focus on exploration for equipment present from the first Mass Effect and the lack of variety from Mass Effect 2 without the strenuous weapon system of the first game. Modding also returns as well, allowing the player to customize their weapons by adding equipment that boosts certain stats such as damage and range as well as scopes. Although these mods do not completely change how a weapon performs like in the first game, they feel substantial in terms of helping playstyle, and with the squadmates gaining access to weapon mods on top of the expanded leveling, this game makes squadmates undoubtedly the most powerful they've ever been. Give Garrus a Typhoon with damage mods and his armor-piercing ammo with a focus on damage in terms of a leveling skill tree, and the result is that he alone can destroy even the toughest enemies in the game, such as brutes and harvesters, on insanity. If all of this was already complex, the way powers and weapons work in terms of equipment further add depth to the system. Unlike the previous games, Sept is now able to equip any weapon they want and use them as if they were fully trained with the weapon, but at the cost of adding more weight. Each class has a weight limit depending on the focus of the class, with soldiers naturally having the highest limit since their class predominantly focused on weapon choice over power usage. The higher the weight, the longer power cooldowns will be, with a notable penalty towards recharging if the player goes over their weight limit. Conversely, a light weight load means that the power usage can always be on the up, allowing power-focused classes to constantly be throwing out their abilities, but often at the cost of heavy weaponry. Whether the player should lighten their load for more power usage or bring a heavy arsenal is dependent fully upon their class choice, playstyle, squad setup, and the missions they're going on. Base movement and melee combat have also been improved. Sept now has an infinite sprint, can roll in multiple directions, swap between cover, and slide over surfaces. While some fans argue that these changes align the gameplay with Gears of War rather than a role-playing game, that combat choice helps align with the war focus of the game and makes combat more intense. Melee is a bigger focus than ever before as well, with each class now having a new melee attack, such as the soldier manifesting an Omniblade or biotic characters using a heavy push. All of them have unique properties as well, such as infiltrators having electrical damage or the Vanguard having a unique running melee attack. As expected though, the enemy design also evolves to deal with the player's new abilities, with enemies being far more aggressive, throwing grenades, having far more variety, and having new abilities to counter the player and force them to adapt. Reaper enemies, as expected, are the standouts, ranging from the Husk rushing the player to flush them out of cover and come into the direct fire of Reaper troopers, brutes being heavy amalgamations of Tyrian, Krogan, and Reaper syntheses that do massive damage and act as the tanks, or perhaps the most dangerous, the Banshee. Asari Adak Yakshi turned by the Reapers, they can teleport around the arena, throw massive warp attacks that eat through health and shields, have heavy barriers, and can grab the player or squad mates if they're too close for an insta-kill attack. Cerberus also becomes an antagonistic force, and while that is a narrative problem that will be discussed later, they do provide unique challenges on their own, from shock troopers, to snipers, to engineers that shut up shield pylons and turrets, to full-on mechs, to even melee enemies that can rush Sept and kill them quickly if the player is unprepared. While Sept still regenerates health and shields like Mass Effect 2, now Sept has 5 distinctive health bars, with the loss of a bar only recoverable via metagel, giving the system the weight it had in the first game. Even with shields, Having only a fifth of the health bars can prove disastrous, as once those shields go down, Shepard can be easily killed. All of these choices lead to Mass Effect 3 not only having the best gameplay and combat out of the trilogy, but also accomplishing the team's goal of having one of the best combat systems in the industry. Higher difficulties also put further emphasis on the player mastering the combat, and the game on Insanity is perhaps the best experience of this system, with it by far feeling like the best and most balanced Insanity option out of all three games. Picking correct squad choices, weapons, and abilities, on top of using power combinations, now expanded to include tech and ballistic powers, makes the combat system flourish immensely while still being enjoyable. And again, with builds like the one mentioned above for Garrus, the role-playing aspects within said combat are at their strongest. It still has notable flaws, such as the button to sprint, vault, and cover all being the same, and it can be argued that the combat is easier than Mass Effect 2 due to how strong power combinations are, but none of that truly takes away from it being the absolute best aspects of Mass Effect's role-playing and combat options within the trilogy. Mass Effect 3's combat is noted first because it's the aspect of the game with the least amount of problems, unfortunately. As noted, the main goal of the game is to ally the galaxy together in an attempt to stop the Reapers and save Earth from annihilation. A question might arise as to how the galaxy is meant to destroy the Reapers when one was so powerful that it took the combined might of multiple fleets to take it out. And to be fair, Mass Effect 2 did hint at the possibility of the galaxy upgrading their tech and weapons to deal with these threats, such as the Tanix cannons developed by Turians following the Battle of the Citadel. But it becomes clear that this is something Mass Effect 2 should have been focused on when the solution to the Reaper invasion was revealed in the first real mission outside of the prologue, in which, after meeting Liara on Mars, it's revealed that the Protheans were building a super weapon known as the Crucible, that with the help of the rest of the galaxy can be built to utterly destroy the Reapers. Drama over the details was already something Mass Effect 2 made clear with its main narrative choices, but the existence of the Crucible being introduced in the third entry on the planet that humanity discovered mass relays on, with the excuse as to why they didn't discover the plans earlier being left fully unexplained, make this a very big Deus Ex Machina to swallow right out the gate. With the Crucible being the main objective, the focus of the game and its progression becomes building up effective military strength, EMS for short, by completing main missions, side quests, and the DLC to provide both an attack against the Reapers and research to build the Crucible. On paper, the idea of EMS is an evolution of both the suicide mission preparation and the gathering of allies in Dragon Age Origins, with a combination of both on top of the build-up of choices from previous games in the trilogy. The strength of your EMS even has an impact to some degrees on the endings, with the hardest possible ending only achievable when your total military strength is at its maximum, mainly through playing the entire trilogy. There was one notable problem with the entire system at launch, however, and that, of course, was the multiplayer integration. In the original release of the game, a system known as Galactic Readiness affected the total strength of the player's war assets, calculated by multiplying the total military strength, war assets via decision and completion, by the readiness rating percentage to calculate the EMS. This percentage was increased directly by participating in the game's multiplayer in multiple different apps, with focusing only on the single player, meaning that the EMS would be limited by 50%. As noted earlier, the idea of the multiplayer being integral to the game's narrative was the entire point of it being included rather than another game mode. However, the result is still ultimately not only disconnected from the main narrative, but also actively weakens the system entirely. Having to buy into the multiplayer, a game mode that, while fun, is not representative of why people played Mass Effect in the first place, and the consequences of not doing so directly affecting the outcome of the ending weakens the strong thematic weight of the narrative, forcing unnatural playtime and having the game feel more like commercial product rather than the somber war story Walters and the writing team set it out to be. What makes this system feel more like a commercial product than capitalism inserted in the art is one of the most reviled monetization systems of the 7th generation. A system so maligned that it would eventually land EA in legal trouble with the government as well as shape monetization for years to come. Of course, I'm talking about loot boxes. Mass Effect 3's multiplayer loop was a cooperative horde mode that allowed players to choose from a bevy of races and classes to both complete different objectives and survive waves of enemies, ranging from Cerberus forces to the Reaper invasion. Credit to Bioware Montreal, unlike other games in its era whose multiplayer felt tacked on and lacked substantial content and focus, Spec Ops The Line is perhaps the most infamous example of this in my mind. Mass Effect 3's multiplayer, dubbed as Galaxy at War, is arguably where the game's combat and powers shine their brightest. Each racing class had unique aspects, stats, and abilities, resulting in 65 unique multiplayer characters on top of the massive amount of weapons noted earlier. Combined with the improvements upon the combat system from Mass Effect 2 on top of the enemy design, it was immensely enjoyable. And like the goal of the combat in general, stood its ground against similar multiplayer horde systems while also being unique within the industry. The curling of the monkey's paw, of course, were the loot boxes. Taking inspiration from card packs like Magic the Gathering, unlocking different classes, supply items, ammo types, and weapons was done via opening packs that were obtainable either by grinding out credits through completing matches or simply buying Bioware points via real money. Higher difficulty matches such as gold matches earn higher currency, and it is possible to earn all of the classes and weapons as well as get the highest possible outcome in the single player campaign without paying money at all. However, the existence of loot boxes and paying out the grind fundamentally affects the way the player interacts with the art in general and turns it into product. As West Finland of PC Gamer notes in their retrospective analysis of the system, a player would have to open, quote, on average, 738 card packs to get every ultra rare, which would cost 73,062,000 credits, or 2,214 real dollars, without spending any money at all. That translates into playing either 236 hours of gold matches or 161 hours of platinum matches, the absolute toughest difficulty the game provides. Much of this was overshadowed by the ending, and with the release of the Legendary Edition, the multiplayer would be completely removed due to the scope and budget of the project not facilitating its reintegration. As such, the EMS system was rebalanced, with the readiness ratings completely removed, the system only looking at war assets and total military strength, and the conditions for the endings recalculated. Although the removal of monetization and the focus on pure single player is best for the narrative experience, the impact of loot boxes on the industry would be massive, as both EA and other publishers would adopt this system as well as influence future forms of monetization to this day, like the Battle Pass. More notably, even if these aspects were cut, they still negatively impacted the game at launch in terms of progression and design, with said monetization choices clearly being a sign of the growing influence and control from EA. It also shows how even when these games are re-released and remastered, changed aspects of the design mean the experience is fundamentally different, a common focal point regarding how video games serve both as art and product. Thankfully, the multiplayer system, especially now that it is removed, doesn't diminish the strong storytelling beats that Mass Effect 3 accomplishes. And as critical as I get in this review, Mass Effect 3 does accomplish some pretty strong storytelling beats. Above all else, Walters and the team's goal of making the finale of this trilogy feel like a war movie is delivered on all fronts. From the immense focus on its gritty action, scene composition that is far more violent and darker than its predecessors, and the incredible score from Sasha Dickinson, Sam Hewlett, Christopher Lennox, Clint Mansell, and Chris Velasco, the tone of Mass Effect 3 is fantastic. In terms of the score, though Jack Wall, the previous composer of the first two games, chose not to return to move on to other projects, Mass Effect 3 brings back music from the earlier entries to not only bring a sense of nostalgia for the journey but also resolution. The new music, as described by the composers, strive to combine the heavy synthetic nature of the first game and combine it with the orchestral nature of the second game, leading to some of the most standout tracks in gaming. In many ways, part of the reason Mass Effect 3's best story beats hit as hard as they do is predominantly due to the music. Leaving Earth is a prime example of this, as the song playing over the Reaper's landing on Earth and destroying it as Shepard is forced to leave the planet behind in an attempt to save the galaxy immediately puts the weight of the narrative and the sense of finality right on the player's shoulders. That weight is also enforced within the mission design of the game and exploration. Due to the nature of the narrative, Mass Effect 3's mission design is completely focused on the combat and cinematic approach, with many missions having notable set pieces similar to other third-person action games at the time. Though the lack of the hub world and character interaction is lamented, the nature of the war against the Reapers makes it an understandable decision as to why these missions are so combat-focused. Similar to Mass Effect 2, the galaxy map allows the player to travel between clusters with fuel, as well as scan for resources, with a notable change. Rather than scanning each planet for different elements to build weapons and gear, the Normandy SR2 now has a scanning wave that can detect which planets have important resources, with resources this time around being war assets or items for side quests to get more war assets. However, should the player enter a system with Reaper activity, scanning will begin to alert Reapers to the presence of the Normandy. Too many scans result in the Reapers chasing down the Normandy, forcing the player to leave the cluster or be caught, resulting in a game over. Similar to the changes in exploration between Mass Effect and Mass Effect 2, part of the goal was to focus on criticisms from the previous entries such as how tedious and monotonous the resource scanning was. However, even with the reduced focus on scanning, much of this exploration feels similar to the side quests in Mass Effect 2, having little impact on the narrative outside of number crunching. However, Mass Effect 3 does have more substantial optional content in the form of N7 missions that reuse multiplayer maps, as well as optional missions that are similar in scope to loyalty missions in the previous game, having far more effort than the fetch quest design of the exploration. These missions are a notable boost to war assets, factor into the war more notably, and even have returning characters and companions appear depending on the player choices from previous games, such as Jack becoming a teacher for biotic students, Samara searching for her other Ardakyachi daughters, or Grunt on his way to becoming an Urdnot. These appearances of Squadmates are a great way to see how those who aren't a part of Shepard's squad this time around have evolved since the events of Mass Effect 2, as well as concluding their narrative arcs. Grunt, for example, deals directly with the Reaper-enslaved Rachni, and should the player have saved the Rachni Queen in the first game, they can free her once again to have the Rachni ally with the rest of the galaxy, ending centuries-long conflict. Jack's mission at Grissom Academy helps conclude her narrative beat of being a child experiment, raising new biotic kids, and making sure they don't go through the same struggle she did. This mission even features David Archer from Overlord, should Shepard have saved him, and Keighley, a character previously introduced in the prequel novel Mass Effect Revelation. As noted, this does mean Mass Effect 3 lacks certain returning squad mates. In fact, the bulk of the squad mates are those who appeared in the first game: Liara, Garrus, Kaidan or Ashley, depending on who you saved on Vermeer, and Tali. Technically, there are 2 new squad mates, such as James Vega, a hot-headed Marine who acts first and thinks later. James is another case of the grounded soldier type present in these games, but even though he isn't on the same level as Garrus, who by this point is just as memorable and iconic as Shepard themselves, Vega is the second best version of this archetype within the squad selection. Voiced by Freddie Prinze Jr., Vega's hot-headed nature is counteracted by his willingness to sacrifice for the greater good, including his own life. And in many ways, Shepard can be a mentor for Vega, as towards the end of the game, Vega is considered for N7, the game position Shepard was in before they became a Spectre. He also bounces off the cast in a notably more enjoyable way, unlike Jacob, and fits his role far better even if he lacks the depth of the rest of the squad mates. The second new squad mate isn't actually a new character at all. Instead, Edie, the AI present in the Normandy SR2, gains control of the body of Dr. Eva, an android that infiltrated the discovery of the Crucible on Mars for the Elusive Man. With this control, Edie becomes a part of the playable squad, serving a similar role to Legion from Mass Effect 2 in the form of being a synthetic ally, as well as possible love interest to the Normandy pilot Joker to add to the themes in the narrative. Like other plot aspects, however, this too was leaked from a private beta, with notable negative reactions regarding how sexualized her appearance was. While Hudson and the team would note that the purpose was in regard to the main narrative, it's jarring in terms of sexualization. In fact, Edie's new look, in a way, is representative of how sexualized the series would become. It wasn't something that came out of nowhere, however. Miranda from Mass Effect 2 had so many angles and shots of her butt in dialogue and cutscenes that the Legendary Edition reduced them, and there was even a mod in the original that reduced them as well, where funnily enough that same modder would bring back those scenes within the Legendary Edition's modding scheme to sort of counteract the balance. Asari culture is sexual in nature, with the Ardok Yakshi using sex as a narrative driving force, and the romances of each game have sexual scenes or undertones. Edie's narrative issue, for me at least, is that she didn't really need the sexual body at all. Part of her character arc in Mass Effect 2 was about allying herself with organics, bonding with Joker, and garnering Shepard's trust to the point of saving the Normandy for them collectors in the endgame of Mass Effect 2. Her personality and the way she interacts with the crew, as well as grows to feel bonded with organics, is still written well this time around, but arguably the focus on sexualization within her design detracts from that narrative beat, especially when a character like Legion, who Shepard can later meet if they survive the suicide mission, doesn't have any of these aspects at all. Analyzing Edie through queer theory, Brittany B. notes how, quote, Edie is using the heteronormative definitions that she's observed amongst her crew or in public to help her find her footing in the gender that she's chosen for herself, even though it was really a team of 6 male writers who chose that sexualized path for her. But that's a different, much more critically harsh paper written through a feminist lens, in the world among organics. Unlike the Geth, Edie is surrounded by organic races and is therefore subjected to the heteronormative stereotypes of social gender expectations. Unfortunately, none of this unique gender expression is examined in a similar way to the concept of the Asari technically being monogendered, meaning that they can be both mother and father, or the way Geth entirely lack it. With a series that predominantly uses much of the designs of its characters to make a point about their personalities and themes alongside dialogue, Edie's sexuality and the way she's portrayed don't get any unique or interesting analysis or usage just beyond the visual look. She's not even the only one exempt from this type of sexualization. Should the player have saved Ashley in the first game, she returns as a squad mate. Though incapacitated for half of the game by Dr. Eva on Mars, the same happening to Caden if he survives. Unlike the returning companions, that at the very least look similar and build upon their previous designs, Ashley's redesign is by far the most dramatic out of all of them. Her armor shows off more of her curves, and she even has a battle skirt that adds nothing to her character, and like Edie, detracts from her characterization, something that's already an issue. With her writer, Queerblr, leaving after Mass Effect 2, much of her character development from the first dissipates. It feels like without Itoye, Bioware and the writers had no exact clue about what to do with Ashley, and considering she was already disliked by many, it's a shame many of those plot beats were made absent when her aspects of faith and even her growth from xenophobia could have been a great addition to the state of the war. I'm not object to sexuality or sexualization in media, nor do I think I'm above it, as many of my favorite pieces of art either have sex or use sexuality within their narrative to portray their themes and motifs, like No More Heroes, for example. With Mass Effect 3, however, Edie and Ashley are two cases of sexuality and sexualization that not only feel jarring in comparison to their previous versions, but actively undermine their characterizations, or lack thereof. I have these criticisms of Squadmates like Edie and Ashley because the rest of the Squadmates are fantastically written. Garrus solidifies his role as Shepard's best friend by standing alongside Shepard throughout the game. The camaraderie, somber reflection on the war, and conversations of nostalgia help hit home how far their journey has come, how much more complex the galaxy is, and the stakes of their mission, on top of his already enjoyable romance, garnering even more emotion between the two. Tali also shows growth when she arrives, with much of her confidence being a clear inspiration from how Shepard is taking command throughout the narrative, as well as her romance arguably being the fan favorite of the franchise. Caden, in contrast to Ashley, actually gains noticeable improvements in his characterization as well. His quiet and reflective nature this time around helps to ground Shepard, while his reflections of Shepard's time with Cerberus and Cerberus itself feels less reactionary and more thought out in terms of his friendship with Shepard. He's still not as bombastic as other characters, but that feels like a conscious choice rather than a result of lackluster writing. What also ties his improvements together is the decision to make him bisexual, meaning that both male and female Shepard can romance him. While to some extent, same-sex romances were present through Liara in the first two games, Mass Effect 3 aims to actively make same-sex options present in a more meaningful way, something that was planned for characters like Jack in Mass Effect 2, but had to be cut due to Fox News controversy from the first game. Beyond Caden and Liara, other options include Steve Cortez, the shuttle pilot for the crew, and Samantha Trainer, the new comm specialist. It definitely feels like a missed opportunity that the previous game lacked these romances, especially considering other Bioware games such as Knights of the Old Republic and Mass Effect's companion franchise, Dragon Age, had LGBTQ+ romances, and, like the other aspects of these games, is a result of the culture at the time. But at the very least, these romances are thought out in terms of how that sexuality is represented. While Cortez and Trainer are respectively gay or lesbian, the game never treats that aspect of their characterization as odd, strange, or even against the norm present in the universe. Rather, it's just a part of life. Shepard can even help Cortez grieve over the loss of his husband, and the game treats it with a sincere level of emotion and honesty. In general, the romances of Mass Effect 3 with Squadmates are all enjoyable, especially because where Mass Effect 2 ran into the typical problem of romances not being reflected on after the initiation and romance scene, Mass Effect 3 instead has these romances evolve and feel integral alongside the main narrative. Romance characters have changes in dialogue, interact with other characters regarding their romance, and there are even date events for each romance. Adding to this, Squadmates now interact with each other between missions outside of Shepard's control, giving the greatest feeling of bonding the series achieves. Tali and Garrus even start a relationship with each other if the player doesn't invoke one with either of them, making these characters feel like actual realized people. By far the most extensive and focused character of the entire game, and by extension the entire series at this point, is of course Dr. Liara T'Soni. Focused on using her abilities as the Shadow Broker to help the Crucible and war effort, as well as documenting history, Liara has the most extensive and arguably important role within the narrative in terms of the Squadmates, doubly so if romanced. Unlike her DLC in the previous game, Liara feels more in tune with the personality she had in the first game. While she still has the confidence she had in Leia the Shadow Broker, her focus on history, Protheans, and the cycles of the galaxy helps to connect all three narratives even when the main plot of the game struggles to. To some extent, the focus on her is so staggering that the favoritism can be a bit overbearing, but the result in that focus builds arguably the most satisfying romance and growth in the entire trilogy. There's a reason the teaser for the next game show her off, and that's because, in many ways, she's arguably the heart of what Mass Effect is supposed to be. History, romance, discovery, wonder, and emotion. That contrast between the characterization of Squadmates present in Shepard's crew is also apparent in those who are absent this time around. Mass Effect 2 Squadmates suffer the most from this due to the fact that they can be killed in the previous game, and Mass Effect 3 was geared towards new players. While meeting up with them is a great feeling, most of them lack a general sense of impact on the narrative due to the factors mentioned above. That isn't to say their fates and characterizations aren't inflexible, as Miranda, Jack, and Samara can be killed depending on the player's actions or inaction. However, those moments beyond the small emotional impact only matter in terms of minuscule additions to war assets, and it could be argued that the addition of Edie and Vega as companions was not necessary when it was clear that Miranda and Grunt are the same archetype, and having them in the squad would have added more to the later narrative beats. Romances from the second game are weakened as well due to that lack of presence, and no more do these issues become apparent than with Jacob Taylor. Finding him defending ex-Cerberus agents in a side mission, while Jacob's characterization is still lackluster in comparison to the others on its own, his romance somehow manages to double down his problematic aspects by him being the only romance option to actively cheat on Shepard, and worse, become a father due to the affair. If this was written in a more complex narrative, perhaps this could have made him stand out in a notable, interesting way. Yet, like most of Jacob, all it does is push the narrative of him being the worst companion, notably contrasting with how Mass Effect 3 tries to be progressive in many ways. This was a notable challenge for the team, as Walters in that same interview noted earlier mentioned that the focus for the third game was always planned to be on the Squadmates for the first game. Quote, "It certainly shook up how we were going to handle coming from a game that was so focused on all the characters. Many Mass Effect 2 missions were about the characters themselves, whether it was their acquisition or their loyalty. And of course, the final sequence was so much about the relationships and everything Shepard had done to make them loyal or not loyal, or who was best to do something. We knew we had to shake things up a little bit, because we kind of said, well, there's certain people who just aren't always going to be there. We can't depend on them as characters. So it's always going to be hard for us to tell a story around that. This treatment of characters is a shame because the characters that do have an impact upon the narrative do so in a way that is not only incredible, but adds to the absolute best parts of Mass Effect 3. Tuchanka and Wannok. What makes Tuchanka and Wannok stand out amongst any other plot beat in the game is that they are the narrative elements that live up to Bioware's claim of every choice in the narrative mattering so far. Tuchanka's arc of curing the genophage is one that was brought up back in the first Mass Effect with Rex, and will possibly even die if the player chooses the wrong choices. Mordin in 2 can directly show regret over his actions in continuing the plague, and both of these characters and the decisions Shepard makes within their narratives are the focus of this entire arc. With the Turians needing the Krogan strength, the Krogan demanding a cure for the genophage, and the Solarians fearful of what a new Krogan birth explosion would be due to the galaxy, Morden and Rex become integral to not only to the plot, but the outcomes of the situation. Numerous decisions made previously changed one's viewpoint of the entire arc. Rex not surviving, for example, means that Weave, a more bloodthirsty not replaces him, not comprehending that the Krogan's attitude and lifestyle are a part of the reason they're dying. Morden not recovering the data used by Malin can mean that Eve, the Krogan woman whose DNA can cure the Krogan, dies, meaning the needed stability and mental fortitude she possesses will be lost for the Krogan. Among all of these drama and choice reactions, the Solarian Dalatrash, leader of the species, offers full Solarian support to the war effort in Crucible should Shepard intentionally sabotage the genophage. All of these choices, consequences, and outcome lead to fighting the Reapers on Tuchanka, the best mission in the game, and arguably the best in the entire trilogy. Though it has moments that are a bit contrived, such as the bridge debacle, the emotion, stakes, combat, and action are all Mass Effect 3 at its absolute best. To top off the spectacle, Shepard and his crew even summon Calros, the mother of all Thresher Mars, to absolutely annihilate a Reaper, making the most formidable of alien wildlife in the previous game turn into an invaluable ally. That spectacle leads to one of the most powerful, heart-wrenching, and decisive moments in the trilogy. At the heart of the Shroud, the monolith built to spread the genophage, Morden realizes that due to the damage done, releasing the cure will result in his death due to the damage of the infrastructure. How Shepard reacts can go in a myriad of ways. He can object, trying to save Morden only for Morden to say it has to be him, that someone else might have gotten it wrong, even screaming that he made a mistake in making the genophage worse. Should Shepard want to sabotage the cure, depending on their interactions with Morden up to that point, they can either convince him or shoot him in an attempt to stop him. This decision has a massive consequence as well if Rex is alive. Unlike Reeve, who is none the wiser, Shepard is attacked by Rex on the Citadel after, learning from informants that Shepard sabotaged the cure, resulting in either Sisek or Shepard killing their old comrade. It's genuinely masterful how this mission and its results, both big and small, are a direct result of the choices in the trilogy. And to this day, very few games even come close to this level of impact between releases within a franchise. On paper, Rannoch is similar, resolving the conflict between the Geth and Quarians present within the previous two games. From Tally's explanation of the Geth being attacked by the Quarians at first, to her father dealing with activating Geth to help prepare the Quarians for an eventual war with the Geth, contrasted with Legion's representation of the Geth, similar to Tuchanka, both Tally and Legion's narratives come together. With the Quarians deciding to wage war on the Geth to retake their homeworld, Shepard, though possibly reluctant due to attempting to warn the Quarians against the war, helps them fight against the Geth, saves Legion, gains access into the Geth network, and ultimately stops the war through various means. On paper is noted, because whereas Tuchanka's arc felt like an incredible and consistent follow-up from the first game, in contrast, the fight for Rannoch is achieved through a major caveat, the change to Geth lore, with Itoye also being responsible for the Geth narrative, one that stood out from how it contrasted other depictions of artificial intelligence in sci-fi via a lack of desire to emulate organic life. The Geth in Mass Effect 3 unfortunately have their motivations and characterizations changed to value individuality. Playing these games back to back, it's jarring to see Legion go from critiquing the dangers of individuality as well as the reliance on the Reapers from the heretic Geth to wishing for individuality, possibly referring to themselves as I. It's meant to be more dramatic and emotional, but like Edie, that change diminishes the uniqueness and great writing of the Geth and artificial intelligence present in the previous games. On a more negative scale, Mass Effect's decision to focus on the drama over the details with the Geth shows directly why those details mattered. This is no more apparent than in the representation of the Geth being hunted down by the Quarians within the Geth network. In the first two games, while it's explained that the Quarians did indeed initiate conflict with the Geth, the result was that the Geth hunted down the Quarians to near extinction, resulting in their suits and the flotilla. There's a reason Tali gets angry at Shepard when he notes that it sounds like the Quarians got what was coming, and why she's quick to nearly shoot Legion in their conflict during the second game. With that framework, it makes sense why the Quarians attack, even if it goes against what the player wants. However, with Mass Effect 3, the Quarians are represented in a far more negative light, shown to kill Quarians who sided with the Geth as well. That sense of unhinged hostility also extends to how the Quarians handle the actual war. Playing through the missions, building into Rannoch, it continually represents their actions as short-sighted, unhinged, and that this war was a horrible idea. The only thing that keeps the character allied in a sympathetic light with the race is Tali. There's a reason for that, of course. After fighting the Geth on the surface of Rannoch, and even fighting a Reaper on foot with the help of the flotilla, Legion begins to activate Reaper code in the rest of the Geth, resulting in them garnering true intelligence. With this upgrade, the Geth will be able to wipe out the Quarians completely, and as a result, Shepard must choose between saving the Geth or saving the Quarians. Both decisions are costly, and saving the Geth results in Tali killing herself and joining her now extinct race, while saving the Quarians results in having to kill Legion. It's an extremely challenging choice, and despite the respective Paragon Renegade reputation, each decision is catastrophic. That is, unless Shepard manages to choose peace. Achievable by having Tali and Legion both alive and loyal, completing the side quests present around Rannoch, stopping Tali from being exiled, solving their argument in the previous game via peace, saving Admiral Chorus in this game, and destroying the heretics, Shepard can choose to save the Geth and broker peace, telling the Quarians to stand down. It also requires massive points in Paragon Renegade, but considering the way the game so far has built the player to interact with that wheel, as well as Mass Effect 3 combining both bars and their overall reputation, that's the easiest part. Not all of these points noted have to be earned as well, but garnering the majority of them allows the peace to be commenced. Legion still dies, though it gives up its life to completely upgrade and facilitate the peace. And in a massive bonus to the war effort and war assets, Shepard gains both fleets. On the one hand, it does dilute the decision quite a bit to have a straight-up best option, especially one that is Paragon-leaning, a problem that'll be discussed later on. Worse, should the player romance Tali, her face reveal at the end of the game was so lambasted at the time due to it being a photoshopped image that it had to be patched in the Legendary Edition. However, the sheer amount of effort to get this achievement of synthetic and organic peace, as well as new players to Mass Effect 3 being fundamentally unable to achieve this peace at all, makes it at the very least satisfactory. Regardless of its specific flaws, both Rannoch and Tuchanka are the ambition Mass Effect 3 strives to be. That can't be said in any way about the other half of the game, because unfortunately, there is another enemy besides the Reapers noted earlier that Shepard must focus on. Cerberus. Cerberus outside of the ending is the most disappointing and flawed aspect of Mass Effect 3, which makes it even worse that there's such an integral focus of the plot. As noted when discussing Mars and the Beacon, Shepard comes in contact with Dr. Eva, a Cerberus android under the direct control of the Elusive Man. Whereas Mass Effect 2 could have ended with Shepard either distant or allied with the Elusive Man depending on the collector-based decision, Mass Effect 3 clearly paints him as the main antagonist of the game alongside the Reapers. Clearly indoctrinated alongside other Cerberus members, the Elusive Man now strives to seemingly control the Reapers, harnessing their power to push humanity into godhood. And despite it being an ending choice, there's no way the player can directly ally with him under any circumstances whatsoever. Like Sharon from the first game, his idea of harnessing Reaper technology in any way is painted as a negative. But whereas Sharon's relationship with the Reapers was used to great effect in subverting the plot of the first game, the Elusive Man, even with Martin Sheen's phenomenal voice work, is much weaker as both a presence and antagonist. While he was never a good person, his methods were unique in that Shepard could fundamentally agree or contrast with him in the second game, placing him in an interesting space as an antagonist. Here, though, he's an absolute fool. His attempt at controlling the Reapers is depicted as a straight-up failure. Neither the player nor Shepard can make a distinct connection between him and Sharon. Worse, it makes renegade players who sided with him in the second game look like complete and utter idiots for even doing so. That's what the entire storyline revolving around Cerberus feels like. In perhaps the worst way, very little of the choices the player made with the faction in previous games directly matter. Even the decision to keep the collector base doesn't matter because somehow, even when the base is destroyed in the Omega 4 relay, Cerberus still manages to recover parts of the Human Reaper. They actively feel more like a hindrance for much of the plot rather than complementing it, all the way to the end of the narrative, in ways that don't even make much sense other than straight up being indoctrinated by the Reapers. These choices, combined with how the majority of Mass Effect 2 Squadmates are treated within the game in terms of how lacking they are within the main plot, make that game feel even worse narratively within the trilogy. Outside of the companion loyalties, the entire plot of the Collectors and the morally grey representation of Cerberus don't matter in the slightest when it comes to Mass Effect 3, to the point where it makes it clear that this trilogy wasn't planned out at all. Yet with all the flaws present within Cerberus in the representation, there is one character so universally despised, so genuinely horrible in their integration to the plot, that even their voice actor, award-winning Troy Baker, would regret the role. That character is none other than Kai Leng. Toward the midpoint of the game, Cerberus somehow manages to attack the Citadel through Udina, who somehow became indoctrinated. How or why is never explained, even though despite his hostilities, Udina does wish for the best regarding humanity, even growing to respect Shepard earlier in the game. The reason for this is due to the removal of the Prothean squadmate, resulting in the mission being placed earlier, as it was meant to happen after Thessia, the Asari homeworld. Regardless, as Shepard goes to save the Solarian Counselor, they're attacked by Leng. From the moment he appears, his ninja aesthetic and edgy dialogue is so immensely jarring from everything around him, complemented, of course, by his katana. Though the Solarian Counselor can die here, for those who are legacy players, he'll be stopped by either Captain Keighley, present during the Vermeer assault from the first game, or Thane. Thane, who by this point is sick to the point of being unable to join you, manages to nearly beat Leng before being fatally wounded. And though Leng escapes, he even gets chased off by Captain Bailey of CSEC towards the end of the mission. Everything wrong with Kai Leng narratively is shown here. Beyond his edgy and outlandish appearance within the setting, whenever Leng appears, he must be the strongest and smartest character in the room, resulting in the other characters looking like idiots in comparison. Thane running to him with a gun, even not shooting him despite getting the jump on him for seconds, is a far cry from the Thane who took out an entire room of mercenaries in mere seconds, illness included. He seemingly also has shields that are Reaper tech, making him invulnerable to firearms initially and allowing him to get away, represented in such an absurd manner that, like his design, feels out of place within the narrative. These negatives also come together with how Shepard and the squad fight him in gameplay. Later on, Shepard arrives on Thessia, the homeworld of the Asari, to find information from a hidden Prothean beacon on the planet, only for Leng to intercept and demolish Shepard's team as Thessia burns. Demolish should only be noted in narrative terms because gameplay-wise, he isn't really a challenge, and it's in his gameplay that the flaws of his character become even more apparent. To understand why Leng from a gameplay perspective just doesn't work, it's important to discuss and dissect why rival characters in other games, such as character action games, work and are so effective to that genre. Part of why rival characters work is because their toolsets and designs often contrast with the player character in ways that are both narratively and mechanically important as well as engaging. Dante and Virgil from the Devil May Cry franchise as rivals are great because they are the opposites in both their narrative and gameplay. Dante's Western gung-ho and stylish aesthetic contrasts with Virgil's regal samurai inspiration. Virgil's hair is slicked back in contrast to Dante's long hair. Dante is red while Virgil is blue, and in terms of narrative, Dante is a cocky and adrenaline junkie who is more in tune with his human side, while Virgil's cold demeanor has him in touch with his demonic heritage. Gameplay-wise, Dante's assortment of weapons and focus on a massive, expressive toolkit purposefully clash with Virgil's more compact yet precise and powerful Yamato, Force Edge, and Beowulf. In every way, they are the perfect rivals. Other examples include Travis Touchdown and Henry Cooldown from No More Heroes, Raiden and Jetstream Sam from Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, etc. Due to Shepard being a character whose class is dependent upon player choice with numerous different options, to be an effective mechanical rival, Kai Leng would have to adapt and counter every class option available, something a boss in the last DLC does much better but taps in here. There are, of course, purely narrative rivals even within RPGs that have flexible character customization and expression, but those are often polarizing because of how much influence they have over the player's idea of their own character. Ulysses from Fallout New Vegas is a prime example of this narrative rivalry. He's meant to be a personification of the impact the courier's choices have on the Mojave, a person who's trying to find meaning in the tragedy that occurred around him, and how that meaning is built in pure destruction. As the courier, the player must decide how to deal directly with Ulysses, either through killing him or reasoning with him regarding history, the future, and choice. Even with the issues people have regarding Ulysses, at the very least, the game properly builds the eventual rivalry between the two from the very beginning of the narrative. Like the mechanical issues, however, Kai Leng also lacks this, because he's introduced in the third game, has no connection to Shepard whatsoever, requires extraneous material to understand his origins, and the rivalry with Shepard seems merely born out of an immature inferiority complex. That's the worst issue about Kai Leng. On one hand, the game wants to represent him as a genuine threat that Anderson warned Shepard about, and will even kill Miranda if she's not warned about him in advance. On the other hand, he's represented as a joke, from being beaten by an ill Thane, chased away by regular CSEC agents, being taunted about running away on Thessia, and even his sword breaking should the player not choose the renegade interrupt to execute him, though most people do. His powers and abilities used to kill Shepard don't translate to actual difficulty within the fight, but when the cutscene starts, characters suddenly become unable to deal with him, making his presence have notable dissonance, especially in the case of Shepard and crew being attacked by the same gunship Shepard destroys by the dozen in Mass Effect 2. The infamous email of him taunting Shepard over Thessia is the epitome of this, and perhaps a perfect representation of his character. Annoying, try-hard, pathetic, and making every part of the plot he takes a part in worse. With the issues presented, it's clear that Mass Effect 3's problems existed far beyond its ending, but if anything, the final stretch of the game is both the absolute best and absolute worst of the trilogy, all condensed into the final mission. With the Crucible complete, the fleet's ready, and the unfortunate revelation that the Citadel is indeed the final component of the Crucible, and that the elusive man has of course notified the Reapers, the final push begins towards Earth, with the joint assault on Cerberus and Earth being the point of no return. Seeing all of the fleets amassed in a massive space fight against the Reapers is one of the best visuals within gaming, period, representing the scale and loss incredibly. From the moment Shepard lands on Earth, the game throws every single exhausting challenge at you. Waves of the strongest Reaper-class enemies attack Shepard and the squad relentlessly as they fight through collapsed buildings, former stores, the streets, and the foxholes present throughout the battlefield. Having the initial viewpoint of Earth in the introduction contrasted with the utter devastation feels earned. This is war. It is utter hell and relentless in every circumstance. Choices are immediately thrown at the player, with their investment or lack thereof in Cortez's narrative resulting in his survival or death, immediately setting the stakes to a maximum. By far the hardest part of this mission is defending a set of Thanos missiles to destroy a Reaper in front of the beam responsible for transporting all matter to the Citadel. The main way Shepard will get into the Citadel and activate the Crucible. Every single enemy type to multiple Banshees will attack Shepard, resulting in an appropriately exhausting and seemingly hopeless defense until the final moment when the missiles land and destroy the Reaper. Narratively, the game also tries to build this finality. Before the final push to the Thanos missiles, the player can talk to all the present Squadmates, including Rex, as well as the other Squadmates via the comms link. While the comms link conversations lack the in-person impact, they are all sincere. However, like the base game prior, they pale in comparison to the interactions present with the Squadmates in person. From Shepard and Garrus's commitment to each other, Rex being proud to call them friends, Edie fully believing in herself and garnering respect for life, and Liara's moment in the void with Shepard, all of them hit at an incredible emotional level, especially romantically. Specifically, Shepard and Garrus's romance was so heavy when recording that you can hear Jennifer Hale get notably emotional during her line delivery. Again, the peaks and valleys of Mass Effect 3 are apparent. Unfortunately, the lowest valley of the entire trilogy is about to be hit after the Thanos missiles and the beam one to the Citadel hit and destroy the Reaper. In past reviews, I've noted the DLC after discussing the base game, outside of how the Legendary Edition provides content that's integrated into the base experience rather than the straight-up expansions, such as the added characters in 2 and weapons to give the base game space to breathe in terms of its narrative and content. From the moment the Beam 1 begins, however, that has to change, because the very first narrative DLC for Mass Effect 3, the Extended Cut, makes a notable difference. As Shepard is running towards the beam, in the original ending, whoever was in Shepard's squad would be annihilated by the Reaper Harbinger, the main antagonist of Mass Effect 2, unless the player's EMS was high, in which case they would just disappear. The Extended Cut adds an actual scene of the Normandy breaking from the battle above and saving them, with a nice and somber scene between love interests before the ship leaves. As Shepard goes towards the beam, they're caught in a blast of a Harbinger laser, and after a weak but desperate walk towards the beam in a broken, battered state, they arrive to the Citadel. Anderson and the Elusive Man are waiting there, with the Elusive Man using Reaper powers to manipulate and control Shepard and Anderson. This is another example of the ever-changing nature of the production, as the final hours of Mass Effect 3 revealed that there was an initial idea of making the Elusive Man a full-on boss fight, only for it to be scrapped, of course. What remains, despite the presentation, is just a similar situation to Sharon, where Shepard either kills the Elusive Man, or having passed multiple checks earlier in the game, convinces him to kill himself. That result was disappointing, even with the somber death of Anderson, should he not have been killed in the prior conversation, of course. The final confrontation in the entire trilogy is perhaps not only damning to the game, but the most significant piece of backlash, hysteria, anger, and disappointment any game has ever received. A narrative decision so disastrous that it still affects Bioware's reputation to this day. The bulk of every single choice made throughout the entire galaxy, throughout the entire trilogy, is Shepard having a conversation with a childlike representation of the Reapers known as the Star Child, explaining to Shepard that organics and synthetics will always have conflict, resulting in Shepard having to choose 3 different endings. They can either destroy the Reapers and all synthetic life, including them seemingly, control the Reapers, or perfectly combine organics and synthetics via synthesis, and it was as every bit as jarring as it was frustrating. The original ending is noted, with the extended cut DLC and legendary release meaning that most people won't experience the actual original ending of the game at launch. What was at launch lacked the epilogues, the detailed explanation of the purpose of the Crucible, and the notable differences within the endings. Instead, Shepard chose between the aforementioned options as the Crucible went off, resulting in the mass relays destroyed, Shepard's crew stranded on a remote planet, and the galaxy and its fate left in disarray. To say the response was negative would be putting it very lightly. A campaign of sending Bioware red, blue, and green cupcakes, intense harassment towards the team, and a massive online campaign called We Take Mass Effect from fans were only the tip of the iceberg. Noting the backlash, General Community Manager Aaron Flynn noted in an interview with Game Informer, quote, "I remember about a week or so after we had launched, we'd seen all these excellent critical reviews. Then all of a sudden people were saying, I felt the ending was weak. And someone would say, yeah, I actually thought it was pretty bad. And someone else would say, I hated that ending. It just snowballed like crazy. And pretty soon the whole issue was on fire." End quote. Part of what made the backlash much worse was that this type of ending was specified by none other than Casey Hudson himself in an interview with Game Informer as well before the release, in which he said, quote, "This story arc is coming to an end with this game. That means the ending can be a lot more different. At this point, we're taking into account so many decisions that you've made as a player and reflecting a lot of that stuff. It's not even in any way like the traditional game endings, where you can say how many endings there are, or whether you got ending A, B, or C. It's more like there's some really obvious things that are different, and then lots and lots of smaller things. Lots of things about who lives and who dies, civilizations that rose and fell, all the way down to individual characters. That becomes the state of where you left your galaxy. The endings have a lot more sophistication and variety in them. Combined with the already hostile environment growing around the gaming community regarding issues such as the Gamergate fiasco in the years to follow, the ending to Mass Effect 3 was like a match thrown on a pyre, resulting in a burst of flames that continued to be fed. The resulting extended cut didn't change the ending, but added the content noted above for a better conclusion overall on top of an additional ending known as Refusal, in which Shepard refuses all three endings, resulting in the annihilation of the galaxy, but enough fight to have the next cycle beat the Reapers decisively. Such a decision to give in to the backlash from fans has been noted to affect how game developers and fans interact as well. Quoting Manveer High in an article discussing the impact of Mass Effect 3's ending, Lucy O'Brien describes how the message Bioware inadvertently sent was that it told customers Bioware cared about them and their opinions, but it also told them that they have the power to force change, and some customers, not all, have decided to start abusing that sort of power. End quote. With all of this backlash in mind, what more can be said about in defense of and against this ending? It's easy to argue that something is naturally better, but considering the multiple cut endings noted from multiple sources, it's clear that in many ways, BioWare just struggled to settle on an ending. Though some fans note that it could have been as easy as simply beating the Reapers, the endings presented were clearly meant to end the trilogy on a more challenging and thought-provoking level, something noted by Chris Hepler. Quote, "Any sufficient advanced technology and all that. They wanted and got a really big decision that affects the whole galaxy. If you give it a moment's thought, none of the three options are perfectly moral or the right answer for everyone. Destroy may not solve the problem of AI and organics. Control rewards the Reapers. Even synthesis, which is harder to get than the other two and sounds like it'd be permanent peace, basically violates the entire galaxy's bodily autonomy without consent. So that part, I think, works." End quote. In my opinion, the nature of having a complex and non-right answer for the ending is part of the problem. Not because that's a bad idea, not even because the core of the argument isn't compelling, because it is. but because this idea of having a complex and detailed ending based on moral complexity is something that the series since its second entry has actively worked against. Paragon and Renegade hadn't been noted in detail so far regarding Mass Effect 3, but the treatment and involvement throughout the trilogy, especially in this game, are emblematic of the issues with the ending. Despite all of the focus on a morally complex system, Mass Effect 3 is the most clear in terms of good and evil. Paragons are altruistic heroes who manage to do everything right, while Renegades effectively become genocidal and violent monsters, resulting in further distancing from the companions and emotional narrative. Above all of this, from a fundamental numerical level in terms of the war assets, being a Paragon is far more advantageous than being a Renegade, and much of the narrative weight only hits when playing as a Paragon. That lack of genuine moral nuance is made clear enough even within the narrative of violating bodily autonomy. Synthesis is presented in narratively within the ending's context the clear best choice. It somehow manages to subtract from the actual interesting representation of having the Destroy ending being seen in a Renegade light and controlling Paragon, subverting the essence of both moralities. Again, there's an interesting idea present that controlling the Reapers in an altruistic sense initially can later cause problems, as the road to hell is paved with good intentions, while the Destroy ending, catastrophic to synthetic life, is the best surefire way to completely destroy the Reapers. This is made even worse by the games continuously focusing more on the drama than details as these narratives have continued. Having the Geth change their focus narratively, the lackluster writing and follow-up regarding Cerberus and the Elusive Man, having the entire ending of the Arrival DLC be straight up ignored to the point of it being pointless, and even the focus on the Crucible and how it was found are all examples of these games ignoring much of the details that need to help define these plot angles. Looking at the original release, this is predominantly shown through how the mass relays were destroyed, despite it being explained that the destruction of the relays resulted in the destruction of the clusters they're located in. Refusing any of the choices results in the game simply giving the absolute worst outcome. All of that drama results in something that feels cynical, and while that feeling is in some aspects the point of Mass Effect 3, it undermines the emotional weight and intended drama of the narrative at hand. It would be easy to only blame Mass Effect 3 or even Mass Effect 2, but that issue of drama versus detail is shown all the way back in that original conversation with Sovereign. Despite how incredible that moment is, the decision to make this Eldritch guy not only communicate to the player, but also be beatable, meant that there was inevitably going to be a need to explain their reasons for galactic genocide, a need that would never match the mystery. Combined with the aforementioned aspects, even with the extended cut, you would still most likely result in a lackluster ending. The moment the player thinks about the details, the ending begins to fall apart. And despite the want of a challenging ending, the reality is that the hardest ending, harder than even Synthesis to get, is the high EMS Destroy ending. The ending that results in Shepard surviving, putting into question if the Crucible really did wipe out all synthetic life. Beyond that, having Shepard actually survive in this ending emotionally skews the choice for the player as well. That's why in many ways, talking about and breaking down the details of each ending and the specifics don't matter, because they fundamentally weren't written with these aspects in mind. In fact, these ending choices are a prime example of what the title of this essay is referring to: inevitability. The crunch culture present while developing the first game, lack of narrative built up in the second game on top of trying to appeal to a casual audience, the numerous amount of endings cut all the way to the finish line, the encroaching influence of EA, the push towards multiplayer from the top brass, and the deadline for Mass Effect 3 being roughly 18 months all paint a stark reality that this game was never going to be able to fully capture its potential as the trilogy finale. And that's part of the reason other games, even trilogies following in the vein of Mass Effect such as The Witcher, don't have such an intense focus on decisions carrying between every game for the intent of massive impact. Yet again, the original Mass Effect, despite its accomplishments, was a result of constrained ambition, and as such, it feels both disappointing and understandable that the finale of such a trilogy would be the absolute best and worst of everything that this series sought to achieve. Similar to Mass Effect 2, Mass Effect 3 received a substantial amount of DLC, both for the single-player campaign and for the multiplayer. Noted above, the first in terms of the single-player campaign was cut content in the form of an actual Prothean. And what a shame he had to be cut, because Javik, the name of the Prothean, might be the best written squadmate in the entire trilogy. Javik works so well because his existence not only demystifies the Protheans, but it's also reflective of the war against the Reapers and the weight of said war. A warrior and the last surviving Prothean in the galaxy, Javik's attitude of callousness and ruthlessness is not just out of anger or even disgust towards the newer races, but out of grief and realization from the war in his time. His famous line,
"Stand in the ashes of 1,000,000,000,000 dead souls and ask the ghosts if honor matters. This silence is your answer,"
is the most quoted and well-known line in these games for a reason. In every way he carries himself, he shows how he was born in war and death, and that war and death is something he's always known. This allows him to perfectly contrast with Shepard and especially Liara, who is shocked at the nature of Javik as a Prothean, showing that even the high and mighty of civilization still suffer from the mistakes that the current galaxy does. And Javik stresses to make Shepard aware that they must learn one way or another to not make said same mistakes. As a renegade, Shepard can of course agree and buy into that ruthlessness, but as a paragon, Shepard can remind Javik the importance of hope, even if hope is seemingly a lie. These aspects become most apparent in how integrated Javik is with the Reaper plot. It becomes painfully obvious that he was cut late into the design process because so much of the plot becomes more interesting with him involved. When interacting with a Prothean VI, his conversations reveal much of the tragedy of the Reaper invasion, as well as his eventual belief that Shepard does indeed have a chance. His anger at the Asari for how they hid the data of the Protheans and Liara's disbelief is so integral that it feels like the player is missing out if he doesn't come to Thessia. And should Liara be interrupted in her anger with him after the mission, he shows that said anger came from the Protheans believing in the Asari. It's a lie, but as he's learned, sometimes a beautiful lie is what people need to keep going. After all, isn't that hope sometimes? His character, however, is at its best with his ending. Alongside his gear, a Prothean data shard with the memories of his people is present. Eventually, once he's bonded close enough with Shepard, they're given a choice to either have him experience the shard or simply destroy it, a sign that he should let go of his people. Kasumi had a similar issue with the lockbox at the end of her loyalty mission, where keeping those memories or letting them go was a choice. Though represented in the typical Paragon and Renegade choices, it's one of the few times where choosing the Renegade option and not allowing Javik to experience those memories, to let the past die, might just be the best outcome. Should he experience them, the grief is overwhelming, and on Earth, he reveals after the war, he plans to take his own life where his people were buried. The experience of being the absolute last of his kind breaks what seems to be an unbreakable soldier, as he feels the Protheans in general are long dead, and who's he to prove otherwise? Alternatively, letting go results in him deciding to move on with a myriad of different futures depending on player choice and when he was recruited. But he realizes that for so long he had been a soldier that he never actually got to live in peace. Either ending is tragic, somber, and fitting, boiling down to that point about hope. Even if it may be a lie, it can be a beautiful lie, one worth living for. The first official expansion for the game was Leviathan, and the Eldra Core mention is made to be the point of this DLC. From the moment Shepard and Edie interact with an artifact that's seemingly older than the Reapers themselves, the Lovecraftian atmosphere is overbearing. only made more intense when trying to find the doctor responsible for research on another planet reveals that all of the inhabitants that worked with the doctor were enthralled for over a decade. Mechanically, while the combat of the narrative isn't changed from the base game, the way the plot progresses is genuinely unique. Using a galaxy map and the information present in the Citadel lab the Leviathan artifact's in, Shepard must piece together each important location with every piece of information they can find. Such detective work not only builds up the eventual encounter with the Leviathan Abyss, hinted at since the first game, but also appropriately feels similar to the discovery of the Reapers in the original. All of this leads to Shepard, greatly represented in terms of narrative, is desperate to find the Leviathan, taking a deep-sea atlas mech to find the Leviathan Abyss deep under the ocean of the planet it's located on. Much of the point of this expansion, and the eventual encounter with the titular creature responsible for creating the Reapers, is in direct contrast to one of the most popular theories about the ending of Mass Effect 3, the indoctrination theory. The theory proposed that Shepard was being slowly indoctrinated over the course of the game, with the child he saw dying in the introduction constantly haunting Shepard's memories throughout the game and becoming the physical representation of the Reapers via the Crucible. Aspects such as Shepard miraculously surviving the Harbinger attack and the eventual choices, as well as Shepard surviving in the Destroy High EMS ending, led people to believe that the final choices were Shepard fighting against the indoctrination attempt, with Destroy being him successfully defeating the Reapers within his mind. Of course, this wasn't true, and the developers would even note that it was pure fan theory, but Leviathan does at the very least seem to point as to why that cannot happen, as the Leviathan of Dis, mirroring the look of the Reapers in a fully organic way, can indoctrinate organics in a far more powerful method, as well as being able to fully block Reaper indoctrination. No multiplayer will even integrate this as well through the blocking of indoctrination, resulting in collectors joining the war against the Reapers. Most notably, it gives the reason for the Reaper's existence to solve the problem of the conflict between organics and synthetics with a more concrete explanation. Of course, it's still narratively flawed, but at the very least, the presentation, horror atmosphere, and meeting with the Leviathan are the elements of Elder Core within the series at its strongest. Conversely, the Omega DLC is arguably the weakest of the expansions. Focused on Arya T'Loak, the ruler of Omega from Mass Effect 2, who in the base game had the station taken by Cerberus, resulting in her refuge in the Citadel, the expansion is all about taking the station back. That hook is the full extent of the DLC, though there are some little complications along the way. Alongside Shepard and Arya, Nyreen, the first female Turian of the franchise, makes an appearance as a bleeding heart in comparison to Arya's callousness in handling Omega, and the two conflict over their morality while Shepard can support either through numerous decisions, even being able to soften Arya's heart over the expansion. The elusive man doesn't make an appearance, instead replaced by General Oleg Petrovsky, a villain that merely serves his role with some allusions and dialogue to real-world conflicts and battles of the past. Some complain that Shepard is Arya's servant within the DLC, but there are multiple times Shepard can act outside of Arya's control. And again, how she deals with Petrovsky in the ending is directly influenced by how Shepard has handled things morally, showing an interesting way that the player's influence directly affects the world around them. It just suffers from not standing out in the way previous DLC narratives or the following DLC will. Gameplay is the bigger issue, however. While it's not immensely difficult, the combat is such a focus that it feels monotonous and repetitive. Combined with how linear the DLC is, it makes the massive amount of combat stick out even more in terms of the negative. There's no unique or interesting level design that truly stands out, which is a shame because Omega as a setting is one of the best within the franchise. Yet nothing about what made Omega in Mass Effect 2 feel phenomenal is here within this game. There is one notable moment that stands out in terms of gameplay, however. During a segment in which Shepard must either divert power from a reactor or shut it down, resulting in the death of thousands, in engineering, Shepard actually has a class interrupt in which they can use their skills to divert the power quickly instead of waiting, garnering approval from Arya and Nynaeve. It's the only time that this happens in the entire trilogy, and it's proof that even in the final content of the trilogy, Bioware was attempting to experiment with more role-playing options, and though a small moment, showed the amount of ambition Bioware had and could have achieved under better circumstances. Citadel, the last DLC released, is not just the best DLC in the game or trilogy, but arguably some of the best content Bioware has ever released, because it focuses on and understands the true reason people love these games and continually played them beyond the controversy of the ending to this day. The characters. The reality is the characters of Mass Effect were always the beating heart of the series, and deciding to end the entire trilogy on that note is better than any of the endings they could have come up with. From the moment the DLC begins with Shepard fighting through a restaurant and crashing through a fish tank to be rescued by their love interest, the tone of the expansion is notably comedic and lighthearted. Numerous quips, jokes, and references to the previous games, as well as the spy tone, all come together to an enjoyable experience immediately. And this is only bolstered by the greatest thing the expansion does in terms of gameplay. Whereas the base game only allowed limited companions, when played right before the endgame, which is the intended experience, Shepard gains access to nearly every playable squadmate that has survived up to this point in the narrative. Rex, Miranda, Jacob, Jack, Samara, Kasumi, Zaid, and Grunt can all be added to Shepard's squad with powers and builds reminiscent of their original designs in previous games. It's highly enjoyable to watch the numerous amounts of dialogue and combinations with different characters, adding so much in terms of replayability within the game and showing how sorely missed they were in terms of the base game.
That's why I love hanging out with you guys. Why shoot something once when you can shoot it 46 more times?
If that weren't enough, the main narrative also somehow manages to do a better rivalry with Kai Leng, because, with its absurd and comical narrative, it uses that tone to show that the best way to actively make a rival for Shepard, the only person that can stand toe-to-toe with both player and character, is Shepard himself. Created by the elusive man as a failsafe, the true main antagonist of the DLC is a Shepard clone trying their absolute best to be the true Shepard, mimicking the dialogue, having specific insults for each companion, and copying the class of the player as well. The resulting final boss fight feels engaging because of this also, as rather than having a boss that isn't challenging but is represented as such, Clone Shepard can actually put up a challenge depending on which class you are. This isn't even the true catharsis of the DLC. Instead, it's a massive party where all the characters interact, chat with each other, and truly exhibit the bonds that have grown over the entire trilogy. More so than any ending or choice in the base game, this party feels like the true cultivation of every choice, interaction, and emotional catharsis the player and Shepard have earned. The essence of tragedy and sobbing is still hid as well within the comedy, with messages from the deceased Mordin and Thane should they have died in this game present. Femshep is even moved to tears should she have romanced Thane, twisting the emotional knife even deeper. On top of the interactions within the party, each character has their own interaction with Shepard, having to parent Grunt to do his shenanigans, cooking with Kaidan, or helping trainer beat a player in a high-stakes chess game, shown in immense dramatic cinematography, are all endearing. The romance options help these moments hit hard as well, such as Jack tattooing Shepard to identify him in case his body is lost, a clear reference to the high EMS Destroy ending, Tally singing a ballad of her favorite musical, dancing with Garrus, or the piano scene with Liara help these romances build their climax. These aspects can be seen as indulgent fan service, and while part of that is true, it's the earnestness that shines through. Citadel wasn't just made to appease the fans, but to have these developers and writers who have put everything into these games reflect on all of that heart within the story. Citadel isn't just a goodbye for the fans, it's a goodbye for the team as well. Somehow, the narrative and the characters aren't the only aspects that are the pinnacle of the game shown in the DLC. Alongside the main campaign, the RMAX Arsenal Arena serves as a combat simulator and arcade experience, in which the player fights against multiple waves of enemies. These enemies range from the Reapers, to Cerberus, to the Geth, to even the Collectors from Mass Effect 2. All of them even have 3 difficulty options, with the hardest enemies providing higher scores. Pushing the scoring system even further, the player can gain modifiers that either boost stats to a negative point penalty or to remove tools for a boost, such as one-shot player shields, no metagel, enhanced enemy shields and damage, and no placed ammunition. Scoring is also increased by keeping up a kill chain, meaning that Shepard must also be mobile to continually chain kills. Combined with multiple different maps and the ability to later unlock the rest of the Squadmates from previous games, the combat of Mass Effect 3 truly shines in every way, becoming immensely enjoyable and revealing much of the depth present throughout the scoring system. The true test of the combat system comes in the last unlockable enemy type within the RMAX Arsenal Arena, Shepard's clones. And not only do you just fight one, but you have 2 rounds with 3 of each class type and 1 round where you have to fight all of the clones at once. In order to actually beat this fight, player builds, squad mate selection, and weapon choice must all be paramount on top of player skill. It's one wrong move and Shepard will be dead in seconds with how ruthless and aggressive the clones are. However, for those who are looking to provide absolute mastery, the modifiers can be added as well. Besides simply being intrinsic motivation and score, getting the highest score possible of 9,999 allows the player to choose 1 out of 3 distinct Cerberus armor sets, the best armor in the entire game, and perfect for the final mission and subsequent New Game Plus ones. As the DLC ends, the party moves out, with the Normandy crew heading back to continue the war alongside Shepard. Played before the finale, it feels bittersweet, as Shepard reminisces over the events with a romance partner or a joker, and like the rest of the narrative, it feels like the final glint of hope and camaraderie before the inevitable end. Played on release, after the base game has been completed though, paints a notably different picture, one that feels so appropriate to end on. Shepard isn't the only one reminiscing, both the developers and players are as well. Every mission, every triumph, every sacrifice, all led to this. If anything, the Citadel DLC is the true ending to the trilogy. Looking back at these games, flaws and all, and remembering how emotionally invested everyone involved became, and how even with the ending debacle, it was all still worth it. To add a neat meta-contextual bow and wrap things up, Shepard's return to the Normandy matches our return to this trilogy. Like Shepard, even if we know the ending of the journey is inevitable, we'll continually replay the trilogy, continually return to the ship and its characters, and continually cherish every moment of this narrative. Years after Mass Effect 3, both the series and Bioware haven't recovered despite its acclaim and sales success in numerous ways. From the loss of veteran staff, the success in forcing negative crunch culture further, the encroaching control of EA and the subsequent monetization, as well as the divide from the fan base, would mean that these issues, as well as the issues present within every game in the trilogy prior, would be issues Bioware continually suffers from. At the time this analysis was written, Dragon Age the Veilguard's failure and the details of its development match many of the problems Mass Effect 3 did. It's easy to just pin all the blame on that game and look at Bioware and rose-tinted glasses. But the reality is that the issues present in Dragon Age the Veilguard's development can be traced back not just to Mass Effect 3, but really across the entire trilogy. Yet, it's hard over a decade later to truly hate Mass Effect 3. Above all else, the entire trilogy sought to accomplish what no other game franchise at the time, and even now, is able to accomplish. Its ambition, even if damning and unable to be met from the initial pitch, shine through each game in the trilogy. And despite the numerous amount of failures, when that ambition is fully capitalized on, there is truly nothing like Mass Effect out there. One can hope that whatever lies next for the franchise, both for the fans and Bioware, not only live up to, but surpass Mass Effect 1, 2, and 3.
Did that all really happen?
Yes, but some of the details have been lost in time. It all happened so very long ago.
When can I go to the stars?
One day, my sweet.
What will be there?
Anything you can imagine. Our galaxy has billions of stars. Each of those stars could have many worlds. Every world could be home to a different form of life. And every life is a special story of its own.
Tell me another story about the shepherd.
It's getting late, but okay. One more story.